The last autumn market in the town of Weisbrunn did not look like a place that stood at the edge of a continent at war. From the hill outside town, the streets seemed almost peaceful. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin gray threads. Church bells rang with a familiar, tired sound. Along the main square, wooden stalls formed two uneven lines, their canvas roofs sagging slightly under a weak drizzle that felt neither like rain nor snow. It was the last day of October, and the cold had arrived early. Elena tightened her wool scarf around her neck as she walked down the hill toward the square. Her boots crunched on the thin crust of frost that had formed on the path during the night. On either side of the road, fields lay empty and brown, the last potatoes already pulled from the soil and stored in cellars, the last cabbages stacked in sheds. In another year, she thought, the market would smell of roasted chestnuts and sweet pastries. There would be music, and children would run between the stalls with sticky fingers and bright red cheeks. Farmers would laugh loudly. Glasses would clink. People would complain about the weather and the price of wool, but their voices would carry that unspoken certainty that next year would be the same as this one, and the year after, and the year after that. This year, everything felt different. There were no musicians in the square, only a single old man with a cracked violin case at his feet, his instrument tucked away, his hands pushed deep into his coat pockets as if he had given up trying. The smell of chestnuts was faint. Sugar was too precious now for anyone to waste it on sweets. Flour was rationed, and the baker had closed his stall altogether. And above it all, like a quiet shadow, hung the sound of distant artillery, a dull, far-off echo that sometimes rolled across the hills when the wind blew from the east. No one spoke about it loudly, but everyone heard it. Elena reached the edge of the market and paused. The stalls that did remain were spread thin, like teeth missing from a smile. A woman sold turnips and wrinkled apples from a faded crate. A man with a gray beard stood behind a small pile of coal, each piece stacked neatly, as if order could make up for the fact that there was not nearly enough. In the center of the square, where a fountain had once splashed bright water in the summer, men in heavy coats now stood in a circle, talking quietly, their hats pulled low. Two of them wore the uniforms of the local defense regiment, though their coats were worn and their boots mismatched. The war had begun far away, at borders and cities Elena had only read about in newspapers. Slowly, as the months passed, it had crept closer. First came stories. Then refugees. Then soldiers. And now, the distant thunder that arrived on the wind. Elena stepped into the square and headed toward the stall where her uncle waited. Late again, Uncle Joseph said, but there was no real complaint in his voice. His face, lined and weathered, softened when he saw her. I was starting to think you had decided to sleep all winter. If I could sleep until spring, I would, Elena replied, setting the basket down behind the stall. But we need to sell these first. She uncovered the basket carefully. Inside, wrapped in cloth and straw, were jars of pickled vegetables, the last of what her family had made during the summer. There were 4 jars of cucumbers, 2 jars of beets, and 3 small jars of mixed vegetables, the kind her mother used to make only for special days. Now, every day felt special in the wrong kind of way. Careful, Joseph murmured, as if the jars were the most precious glass in Europe. If we lose one of those, we might as well pour away a week of meals. I know, Elena said quietly. She set the jars in a neat row on the stall. The wood beneath her hands felt rough and cold. A gust of wind slipped into the square, cutting through her coat and making her shoulders tense. She glanced up and saw gray clouds dragging across the sky like heavy curtains. The first snow will come soon, she said. Joseph followed her gaze. They say this winter will be worse than the last, he replied. The worst in 50 years, some say. They say many things, Elena answered. Last year, they said the war would be over by spring. Her uncle let out a slow breath. Yes. They did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The market hummed softly around them, but it was a different kind of hum than in years past. There was no excited chatter, no bursts of laughter floating over the stalls. Instead, there were low voices, questions asked in whispers, words like front line, ration, and shortage appearing again and again, like stones in a stream of conversation. A woman with hollow cheeks approached the stall. She wore a shawl pulled tight around her head and clutched a small purse in one hand. Her eyes went directly to the jars. "Are those cucumbers?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Yes," Elena replied gently. "Pickled in summer." The woman's fingers trembled as she touched the cool glass. Her gaze flickered to the price board, then back to the jar. "I have 2 children," she said quietly, as if this information alone might lower the price. "Their father, he is at the front. We have little left." Elena glanced at her uncle. Joseph's jaw tightened slightly. He looked down at the small chalkboard with its careful numbers. The cost of salt. The cost of vinegar. The cost of jars. The cost of a long, uncertain winter. "How much can you pay?" he asked. The woman opened her purse and showed them, without speaking. A few coins lay at the bottom, dull and tired. Now it was Elena's turn to feel something tighten in her chest. It was not enough. Not even close. But it was all the woman had. Joseph stared at the coins for a long moment. Then he scratched out the number on the board and wrote another, lower. "For you," he said. "Because winter is coming, and your children should remember the taste of summer." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I cannot repay." "You will," Joseph said. "Live through the winter. That will be enough." She pressed the coins into his palm and took the jar as if it were a fragile treasure, holding it close to her chest. "Bless you," she whispered, then hurried away before the tears could fall. Elena watched her go. "You lowered the price," she said softly. "I did," Joseph answered. "And we might have to eat plain potatoes in February because of it." He paused, then added, "But sometimes, the weight on the heart is heavier than the weight on the pantry shelves." Elena did not answer. She thought of her younger brother, Matthias, who had left Weisbrunn 3 months earlier in a stiff, too large uniform, his shoulders straight and his eyes bright with a nervous kind of pride. "I will be back by Christmas," he had said. "You'll see. They always talk about war like it lasts forever, but it never does." She had watched him climb onto the back of the truck with the other boys from town, their voices loud, their faces flushed. Mothers had waved handkerchiefs. Fathers had stood with their arms crossed, hiding their fear behind stern brows. Children had run alongside the truck until the road turned and the dust swallowed everything. The letters from Matthias came at first every week, then every 2. They were short, lines of ink on thin paper, censored in places, entire sentences blacked out by careful ink. He wrote about the cold at the front, about the food, about the strange silence that sometimes fell before dawn. He did not write about battles. He did not write about fear. And then, 3 weeks ago, the letter stopped. "Uncle," Elena said quietly, "do you think they will send our boys home for winter?" Joseph did not answer right away. He rearranged the jars on the stall, though they were already in neat rows. His hands moved with the slow care of someone who needed a moment to search for gentler words. "I think," he said finally, "that the men who decide such things do not live in towns like ours. They live in warm rooms with thick carpets. I do not know what they will do. But I know this, whatever happens out there," he nodded toward the distant rumble on the horizon, "we will have to survive here." Elena swallowed. The taste of the cold air shifted on her tongue, turning metallic and strange. They spent the rest of the morning selling what little they had. A jar of beets went to an elderly man who walked with a cane and remembered 3 wars before this one. A mixed vegetable jar went to a young couple, their hands clinging to each other as if afraid the wind would tear them apart. Coal from the next stall changed hands, piece by piece, each small black rock a promise of a few more hours of warmth. Above the square, a flock of blackbirds circled, their wings cutting through the air in sharp, irregular patterns. Elena watched them for a moment and thought about how easily they could fly away, over the hills and the trenches and the borders, to some quieter sky. By midday, the drizzle had turned to a light, drifting snow. The first flakes of the season fell slowly, as if testing the ground. They melted on the stones of the square, but clung to scarves and hats. Children pointed upward and stuck out their tongues, trying to catch the flakes, just as they had in years before. Some habits remained stronger than fear. Elena pulled her coat tighter. Her fingers had gone numb, even inside her gloves. "We should pack up soon," she said. "The road will be slippery going home if it keeps snowing." "Another hour," Joseph replied. "We still have 2 jars left. Maybe someone will come." As if summoned by his words, a boy in a worn cap approached the stall. He could not have been more than 12. His coat sleeves were too short, showing red wrists chapped by the cold. He did not look at the jars at all. His eyes went to Elena's face, then to Joseph's, then back again, as if he were searching for something. "Excuse me," he said. "Yes?" Elena asked gently. "Are you Elena Weiss?" His voice trembled slightly on her name. She felt her breath catch. "Yes," she said slowly. "Do I know you?" The boy shook his head. Snowflakes clung to his eyelashes. "No," he replied. "But I know your brother." The square seemed to tilt for a moment, everything shifting and narrowing. The distant rumble of artillery faded into a dull haze as Elena focused on the boy's chapped lips, the way his fingers twisted in the hem of his coat. "You know Matthias?" she asked. Her voice sounded small to her own ears. "Yes," the boy said. "We were in the same unit. I came back on leave. The captain gave me this." He fumbled inside his coat and pulled out a small envelope, the corners softened and bent, the paper stained in one place by something that had spread like a pale flower. He held it out with both hands, as if he did not trust his grip. Elena stared at it. For a moment, she could not move. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the envelope. Her name was written on it in Matthias's quick, slanted handwriting. Her fingers shook as she turned it over. The seal was already cut. The letter had been opened along the edge, the way all letters from the front were opened, read by unseen eyes before they reached their destination. Her thumb brushed over the stamp, worn and smudged. "Is he?" Her voice broke. She swallowed and tried again. "Is he all right?" The boy looked at the ground. Snowflakes melted on his cheeks. "He was alive when he wrote that," he said. "I am not allowed to say more. The captain said to tell you that you should read it at home, not here." Elena felt something tighten around her chest, a band of cold iron. "Thank you," she managed. The boy nodded and stepped back. "I have to go," he said. "My train leaves before dark." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the clusters of people in the square. For a moment, Elena thought of calling after him, of asking for more details, for dates, for places, for anything. But the look in his eyes had told her that whatever he knew would not be gentle, and she was not sure her heart could carry it here, in the middle of the market, with snow falling softly and strangers passing by. She slipped the letter into the inside pocket of her coat, close to her heart, where she could feel its weight. "Come," Joseph said quietly. "We are finished here." They packed the stall in silence. The last 2 jars went back into the basket, wrapped in cloth. They would be saved for the coldest nights. Joseph folded the canvas cover and tied it with rope, his movements precise, as if the pattern of folding and tying could keep the world from unraveling. As they walked home up the hill, the snow grew thicker. It settled on rooftops and on the bare branches of trees, turning the town slowly white. The path under their boots became slippery, and twice Elena nearly stumbled, catching herself on Joseph's arm. "Careful," he murmured. "I am," she replied automatically, though her mind was far away, trapped in the small envelope against her chest. They passed houses with shutters already closed against the cold. From some chimneys, smoke rose in steady plumes, from others, nothing at all. Behind one frosted window, Elena saw a woman knitting by candlelight, her head bowed in concentration. In another, a child pressed his hands and nose to the glass to watch the falling snow, his breath fogging the pane. Weisbrunn had not yet felt the full bite of war, at least not the way cities on the front had. There were no shattered walls here, no burned-out streets. Instead, the war arrived in smaller ways: empty chairs at dinner tables, ration cards with more stamps than food, letters with blacked-out lines, news whispered at the well or in the churchyard. And now, a letter that had traveled through mud and smoke to find its way to her coat pocket. When they reached the small stone house where Elena lived with her parents and uncle, the snow lay in a thin layer on the roof, like a sheet spread hastily over a sleeping body. The front door creaked when Joseph pushed it open. Inside, the air was warmer, but not by much. A small fire burned in the iron stove in the corner, its light flickering over the walls. The room smelled faintly of cabbage soup. Her mother, Marta, looked up from the table where she sat peeling potatoes. Her hands were red from the cold water in the basin. Deep shadows lay under her eyes, and new lines had appeared on her forehead in the months since Matthias had left. "You are late," she said, though there was no anger in her tone. "Did you sell anything?" "Most of it," Joseph replied, taking off his hat and shaking snow from it. "Enough to buy coal for another week. Not enough to make the winter shorter." Her mother gave him a tired smile. "If we cannot shorten the winter," she said, "we will lengthen our patience." Elena slipped off her coat, hesitating for a moment as her fingers brushed the outline of the letter. She did not take it out yet. Not with her mother watching, not with the smell of soup in the air and the crackle of fire in the stove. For a few more breaths, she wanted to keep that envelope as a sealed promise, not yet transformed into whatever words lay inside. "We met a boy from Matthias's unit," Elena said carefully. At once, the room seemed to narrow. Her mother's hand stopped moving. A potato slipped from her fingers and rolled across the table, leaving a wet trail. "What did he say?" Marta asked. Her voice was a whisper. "He brought a letter." Elena reached into her coat and placed the envelope on the table. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound in the room was the soft crackle of burning wood and the distant, muffled thud of artillery, reaching them even through stone walls. Her father, Lucas, who had been mending a broken chair in the corner, set down his tools and came to the table. His face, once strong and open, had grown thinner over the last year. The hair at his temples had turned almost completely white, as if winter had settled there first. He looked at the envelope, then at Elena. "Who will read it?" he asked quietly. "I will," Elena replied. Her voice shook, but she steadied it. "He addressed it to me." She picked up the letter and sat down. The paper crackled slightly as she smoothed it. Her heart beat so loudly in her chest that she could feel it in her throat. Carefully, she unfolded the page inside. Matthias's handwriting flowed across the paper in uneven lines. Some words were smudged, as if written in haste or in bad weather. A few lines had been crossed out and blacked over by a censor's ink, but most remained clear. She took a breath, then began to read. "Dear Elena," it started. Already, her eyes stung. "I am writing this near the edge of a frozen field. By the time this reaches you, most likely the trees at home will be bare, and the first snow will have fallen on the hills above Weisbrunn." His words seemed to pull the world closer around her. He wrote of cold nights in trenches, where the ground was hard as stone and the blankets too thin. He wrote of standing watch while the wind howled over the fields, carrying the faint smell of smoke and something else he did not name. He wrote of the way the sky at dawn looked like an old bruise, purple and gray. He did not write about battles directly, but the lines between his words held a weight she had never heard from him before. "They say this winter will be the hardest yet," the letter continued. "Some of the men are afraid of the cold more than the shells. We try to keep warm with jokes, but the jokes are getting thinner, like our coats." He asked about home. About their parents. About the old apple tree in the yard that had been struck by lightning when they were children, its trunk twisted but still alive. He asked if the river behind the house would freeze solid again this year, the way it had when they were 10 and 8, and had tried to slide across it on their boots. And then, near the end, his handwriting grew more uneven. "If this letter reaches you and others do not," he wrote, know that I tried to remember the taste of mother's soup and the sound of the church bells in Weisbrunn. Know that when I look at the snow here, I imagine it falling on our hills, not these fields. If I cannot come home for winter, I will be there in thought, sitting in my old place at the table, listening to you complain about the cold. A thick black line covered several words after that, where the censor had removed something. Elena's eyes lingered on the dark band, wondering what had been taken from them. The letter ended simply. Whatever happens, Matthias had written, promise me one thing, that you will keep the house warm, even if it is only with a candle. Do not let winter win. Do not let this war take the warmth from you. Your brother, always, Matthias. Elena's voice broke on the last words. She folded the letter slowly and set it on the table. Her mother's fingers reached for it, her hands trembling. He is alive, Lucas said quietly. He wrote this. For now, Marta whispered. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. No one said the thoughts that hovered in the air. If this letter had come by the hands of a boy on leave, and not through the usual post, it meant something had changed at the front. It meant movements. Battles. It meant their youngest child stood somewhere in a landscape of ice and mud and fire. Outside, the wind rose, pressing against the walls with a low, hollow sound. Snow brushed against the window like the softest of hands. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind's eye, she saw Matthias standing in a trench, his breath turning to mist, his hands stiff with cold. She saw soldiers huddled around small fires, their faces hollow and young. She saw a horizon lined with barbed wire and broken trees, all under a sky heavy with snow. We will keep the house warm, she said softly. I promise. That night, as darkness folded over Weisbrunn, the snow continued to fall. It drifted across the fields and piled against fences. It settled in the curves of rooftops and in the crooks of branches. It covered the tracks of carts and boots, softening the hard edges of the world. In the small stone house on the hill, the family ate their simple meal, thin soup, black bread sliced carefully, shared between them. The fire in the stove was small, but they fed it one piece of wood at a time, stretching the warmth as far as it would go. Later, when her parents had gone to bed, Elena sat alone by the window. The letter lay on the table beside her, folded but not hidden. She rested her forehead against the cold glass and watched the snowflakes swirling in the wind, illuminated faintly by the moon. The distant thunder of artillery rolled through the night like an approaching storm. This winter, she realized, would not be like any winter before. It would be a season of waiting and listening, of counting sacks of potatoes and letters from the front, of measuring each day by the amount of coal in the cellar and the strength in their hearts. And yet, in the soft glow of the stove, with the letter from her brother close by, she felt a thin thread of something that was not quite hope, but not despair either. It was a quiet, stubborn resolve. Do not let winter win, Matthias had written. Elena breathed slowly, matching her rhythm to the slow fall of snow outside. The town of Weisbrunn slept beneath a thin white blanket. Soldiers somewhere far away kept watch under the same sky. The war moved across Europe like a dark cloud, but here, in this small house, there was still warmth. There was still a candle lit against the dark. She closed her eyes, holding that image in her mind. As she drifted toward sleep, the world outside grew quieter. The snow muffled the sounds of distant guns, turning them into something softer, almost like a memory. The first winter of the war was settling in, and with it, a story that would stretch across nights of frost and days of gray light. This was only the beginning. And tomorrow, when dawn came pale and cold over the hills, Weisbrunn would wake to a world just a little whiter, a little colder, and a little more uncertain. But for now, the candle burned. The house stood. The letter rested on the table. And somewhere, at the edge of a frozen field, a young soldier named Matthias looked up at the same sky and thought of home. The first true storm of the season arrived 3 days after the letter. It came silently at first, creeping across the hills under a sky the color of slate. The air grew heavier with each passing hour, pressing against doors and windows, slipping beneath scarves and collars. By afternoon, the clouds had thickened into a solid wall of gray, stretching far beyond the horizon. Then, as evening approached, the snow began, not the gentle drifting flakes of the first snowfall, but dense sheets of white that swallowed the world. By nightfall, Weisbrunn seemed to disappear beneath it. Elena stood at the window, watching as the wind drove the snow sideways, piling it against the house in rolling waves. The trees outside bent under its weight, their branches groaning softly. The road leading down into town had vanished entirely, replaced by a featureless blanket of white. Even the sound of the church bells was muted, as though the storm had swallowed them whole. Inside the house, the fire flickered weakly, struggling to push warmth into the room. Her father fed it another piece of wood, one of the last larger logs they had, and shut the stove door with a soft clank. The glow dimmed for a moment, then flared again, casting long shadows across the walls. "It will be a hard night," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Storms like this cut off the towns to the east last year. Some villages weren't reachable for weeks." "Will it get that bad here?" Elena asked. Her father glanced at the window. The wind rattled the wooden frame. Snow pressed against the glass as if trying to enter. "It already is," he admitted. Her mother stirred the pot on the stove, the thin cabbage soup simmering with slow, reluctant bubbles. The scent was mild, almost watery, but comforting in its own way. "We must make what we have last," Marta said softly. "The roads will close soon, and no carts will reach the town until the storm ends." Elena pulled her shawl around her shoulders, though the fabric did little to stop the cold seeping into the room. She had grown up with winters, heavy ones, windy ones, winters where frost coated the inside of the windows, but this storm carried something different. Something deeper. As if the cold itself had sharpened, turning into a blade that sliced through walls and coats and bone. From outside came a sudden thud, then another. Branches, snapping under the weight of snow. Somewhere far off, a dog barked, its voice quickly lost to the storm's howl. Her Uncle Joseph entered from the back room, brushing flakes of snow from his hair. "The shed roof is holding," he said, unwinding his scarf. "But just barely. If this storm keeps up through the night, we may have to clear the snow off it at dawn." "In this weather?" Marta shook her head. "You'll freeze." "I'll freeze faster if the shed collapses and buries half our food," Joseph replied calmly. The wind rose again, a deep, low roar that made the walls tremble. Elena shivered despite the fire. "Do storms like this reach the front?" she asked. Her father paused, his hands hovering above the stove. His expression tightened, not with irritation, but with a kind of tired grief. "Yes," he said. "They reach everywhere." Elena lowered her eyes. In the 3 days since receiving Matthias's letter, she had read it more times than she could count. Some lines had become etched into her memory, repeating themselves in her thoughts like quiet echoes. "Do not let winter win." But winter seemed determined to do exactly that. The trenches at Hollenwald Ridge. Several hundred kilometers away, the storm did not arrive gently. It crashed over the trenches like a living thing. Snow fell so thickly that the world beyond arm's reach disappeared into a white void. The wind screamed through broken tree trunks, carrying shards of ice that stung exposed skin. The trenches, narrow, muddy channels carved into frozen earth, filled slowly with slush, turning the ground into a mixture of ice, water, and old, churned dirt. In one section of the line, a young soldier crouched beneath a sagging canvas sheet stretched above the trench wall. His breath came in short, clouded bursts. His fingers, wrapped in torn gloves, fumbled with the buttons of his coat. Matthias Weiss had never known cold like this. He had grown up with the winters of Weisbrunn, running through fields dusted with frost, fetching water from barrels iced over at dawn, warming his hands by the stove. But the cold on the ridge was different. It was cruel. It crept into his bones and settled there, as if determined to claim him piece by piece. He pulled his scarf up over his face and squinted into the storm. Beside him, Private Leon Kirsch scraped ice from the barrel of his rifle, muttering curses under his breath. His cheeks were raw from the wind, and his nose had been bleeding on and off for hours. "This isn't weather," Leon growled. "This is the world ending." Matthias forced a tight smile. If the world were ending, it would at least be warmer. Leon huffed a laugh, though it came out strained. You're a terrible liar, Weiss. Matthias shrugged, pulling his coat tighter. I try. The canvas above them sagged under the weight of fresh snow. Beyond the trench, the battlefield was invisible. No barbed wire, no tree stumps, no distant flashes of artillery, just a wall of white. Captain Adler strode down the trench, his heavy boots splashing through the slush. Snow clung to his mustache and eyebrows, making him look like a frostbitten ghost. Keep your rifles clean, he barked. The storm won't stop the enemy if they decide to move. Leon snorted softly once the captain had passed. Move? In this? He whispered. If the enemy tries to march through this storm, they'll freeze before they reach the wire. Maybe, Matthias said. But we freeze just the same. Leon looked at him, the edges of his eyes softening with a touch of worry. You thinking of home again? Matthias hesitated. In truth, home was all he thought about these days. When the wind howled over the ridge, he imagined it sweeping through the orchard behind their house. When he cupped his hands around a mug of weak tea, he imagined the warmth of their kitchen stove. When he tried to sleep, he pictured the hills around Weisbrunn under the moonlight. And when he couldn't sleep at all, which was most nights, he pictured Elena's face as he had last seen her, framed in the doorway of their house, eyes bright with hope she did not fully believe. Yes, he said quietly. I am. Leon nudged him with his elbow. When you get home, you'll be the warmest man alive. After freezing here, everything else will feel like summer. Matthias managed a real smile this time, though it ached. If I get home, he murmured. Leon's expression darkened, but before he could respond, a distant crack echoed through the white haze. Both men immediately stiffened. Another crack followed, sharper, closer. Matthias grabbed his rifle. Leon lowered the canvas flap and peered out into the storm. I can't see a thing, he muttered. It could be branches snapping. Or rifles, Matthias finished. A third crack rang out, unmistakably gunfire. Captain Adler appeared again, his face grim. Positions. Eyes forward. The storm is not stopping them. Matthias's stomach tightened. He lifted his rifle and aimed into the emptiness. Snowflakes stung his eyes. His gloves slipped on the frozen metal. For several long moments, nothing moved. Then shadows emerged in the white, shifting, uncertain shapes. Men. Advancing through the storm. Leon cursed under his breath. They're insane. Or desperate, Matthias whispered. War blurred the line between the two. The town that waited. Back in Weisbrunn, dawn arrived without sunlight. The sky was still dark, tinted with the faintest blue, when Elena stepped outside. Snow reached almost to her knees. The air bit at her skin the moment she opened the door. Her breath crystallized instantly. She pulled her coat tighter and struggled through the snow toward the shed. Her uncle followed, carrying a long-handled shovel over his shoulder. We must clear the roof before it collapses, he said through his scarf. Elena nodded, though her teeth were chattering. As they reached the shed, the roof sagged under nearly half a meter of snow. Joseph climbed onto a wooden crate, then onto the lower beam. Elena steadied the crate beneath him, her fingers numb even through her gloves. Careful, she called. I'm not as old as your father, Joseph replied, trying for humor, though his voice trembled with the cold. My bones can still manage this. He thrust the shovel upward, pushing snow off the roof in heavy piles. Each mound fell with a dull thump, adding to the growing drifts around them. Elena tried to help, clearing snow from the ground with her own small shovel. But the storm had left more snow than she had ever seen in a single night. The wind howled through the trees like a pack of wolves. You should go inside, Joseph said after several minutes. You're turning blue. I'm fine, Elena insisted, though her lips were numb. Joseph threw another heap of snow off the roof and grunted. Your brother would scold me if you got frostbite on my watch. The mention of Matthias made Elena's heart twist. I doubt he'd scold you, she said softly. He always thought you could do no wrong. Joseph offered a small, sad smile. He was a good boy. He still is. Yes, Joseph replied quietly. He still is. The wind rose suddenly, blasting them with a wave of icy air. Elena stumbled backward, shielding her face. We're done, Joseph said firmly. Inside. Now. They trudged toward the house, fighting against the wind. Inside, her mother had lit every candle they had, filling the dim room with a flickering golden glow. The fire struggled in the stove, its flame bending with each gust of wind that slipped through the cracks around the windows. Sit by the stove, Marta said, guiding Elena toward the warmest corner. Your hands are frozen. Elena let her mother wrap her hands in a wool cloth warmed near the fire. Slowly, painfully, feeling returned, bringing sharp needles of heat. Her father entered from the back door, shaking snow from his coat. The main road is blocked, he said. I checked the path as far as the bend. No one is going anywhere today. Or tomorrow, I think, Marta murmured. Elena swallowed. If the roads were blocked here, they were blocked everywhere. Supply carts would stall. Mail would be delayed. Soldiers at the front, soldiers like Matthias, would receive nothing. She glanced at the letter sitting on the far shelf, folded carefully inside a jar to keep it safe from the cold and damp. What happens to the people on the front lines during storms like this? She asked. Her father hesitated again. It was the hesitation she had come to dread, the pause where he weighed whether truth or comfort would harm her less. They endure, he said finally. Or they freeze. Her mother whispered a soft prayer under her breath. Elena stared at the floorboards, her heart pounding in her chest. The advance in the whiteout. The storm at Hollenwald Ridge did not stop the attack. Shadows moved through the snow, slow, staggering figures, rifles held across their chests, scarves wrapped around their faces. The storm distorted them, making them seem larger, then smaller, then ghost-like. It was impossible to tell how many there were. Matthias pressed his cheek against his rifle stock, the metal freezing his skin. Snow collected in the crook of his arm. His entire body trembled, not just from the cold, but from fear. Wait! Captain Adler shouted. Hold until we see them clearly. Leon whispered, I can't even see my own boots. The shapes moved closer. 20 meters. 15. Matthias's heart pounded in his ears. Then a sudden gust of wind tore through the ridge, sweeping away the curtain of white for a brief, terrible moment. The enemy soldiers were revealed, tired, frostbitten, barely standing, but advancing still. Fire, the captain roared. The trench exploded with sound. Matthias pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted through his frozen shoulder. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic scent of ice and blood. The storm swallowed the sound almost instantly. Leon fired beside him, shouting something Matthias couldn't hear. Bullets sliced through the white haze. Shadows fell. Some crawled. Others continued forward. The storm closed again, hiding everything. Matthias reloaded with shaking hands. His fingers slipped. The cartridge fell into the snow. Come on, he whispered to himself. Come on. Another shape appeared at the edge of visibility. Then another. Shadows everywhere. The storm twisted them, making them multiply. Captain Adler raised his pistol. Hold the line. Do not let them reach the trench. Matthias aimed. His vision blurred, snow in his eyes, ice on his eyelashes. A shadow rushed forward. Matthias fired again. The muzzle flash illuminated a face, pale, almost blue, before it vanished into the white. He stumbled backward, breath ragged. The storm screamed. Men shouted. Somewhere to his right, someone cried out, Medic! Medic! Leon grabbed Matthias's arm. We have to fall back. They're too close. But before Matthias could respond, a deafening blast tore through the snow, knocking both of them to the ground. His ears rang. The trench spun around him. Snow filled his mouth and nose. He gasped, coughing. "Leon," he shouted, but no sound escaped his lips. Around him, the world was white and silent and shaking. The storm had swallowed everything. The waiting hours. Back in Weisbrunn, the storm continued into the afternoon, though the wind eased slightly. Snow still fell, heavy and relentless, but the world no longer shook with each gust. Villagers emerged from their homes one by one, bundled in scarves and coats, brushing snow from their doorways. Voices floated faintly through the cold, checking on neighbors, calling to children, remarking on the size of the drifts. Elena stepped outside, her boots sinking deep. The town looked transformed, buried beneath waves of snow that reached halfway up doors and windows. Roofs sloped under the weight. Signs creaked. The church stood like a white mountain, its steeple barely visible. She helped her father clear the path leading to their door, shoveling slowly, every movement stiff from the cold. "Do you think the storm will stop soon?" she asked. "It will stop when it wants to," her father said. "But the men at the front?" Her father paused mid-shovel. "Yes," he said quietly. "They face worse than we do." Elena gripped her shovel until her knuckles whitened. She stared at the sky, still heavy, still threatening. If Matthias was somewhere out there in a storm like this. She closed her eyes, forcing her breathing to steady. She would not let fear swallow her. She would not let winter win. The storm breaks. Night fell on the ridge in the midst of chaos. For hours after the first shots, the storm continued to twist the battlefield into something unrecognizable. Men fought shadows. Rifles jammed in the cold. Boots slipped in the slush. Shouts vanished into the wind. Then, just before dawn, the storm began to weaken. The wind softened. The snow thinned. Shapes became shapes again. In the dim gray light of early morning, Matthias pushed himself up from the snow. His ears rang. His hands shook. The trench smelled of blood and gunpowder. Bodies lay scattered along the edges, some enemy soldiers, some his own men. "Leon," he whispered. A voice answered faintly from several meters away. "Here. Weiss, here." Matthias scrambled through the slush, slipping, crawling, until he reached Leon, who leaned against the trench wall, clutching his arm. "You're alive," Matthias breathed. "Barely," Leon muttered. "You look worse than me." Captain Adler limped along the trench, barking orders despite the exhaustion in his movements. "Hold your positions. Reinforcements are coming. The storm saved us more than our rifles did." Matthias gripped the top of the trench and looked out. The battlefield, now visible, was a vast sea of white with twisted shapes scattered across it. Trees had snapped. Barbed wire lay buried. Smoke rose in faint tendrils where explosives had detonated in the snow. He thought of home. Of Weisbrunn under the same storm. Of Elena reading his letter by candlelight. He whispered softly into the cold air. "I will come home. I promise." Whether he spoke to himself, to the wind, or to someone far away, he did not know. But saying the words steadied him. Elena's quiet resolve. Back in Weisbrunn, the storm finally broke just after sunrise on the second day. The clouds thinned. The snow slowed to gentle flakes. The world emerged from beneath its burden, quiet and subdued. Elena stood outside, looking at the white field stretching toward the horizon. Everything was still. Her breath curled into the cold morning air. Somewhere far away, her brother stood under the same sky. Something inside her settled, like snow finding its place. She went inside, lit a candle, and placed it in the window. A small, warm light against the endless white. Just as she had promised. The morning after the storm broke, Weisbrunn woke slowly, like a town shaking off a long, heavy dream. The sky remained pale gray, but the wind had calmed. Snow lay thick and undisturbed across the fields, forming soft, rolling hills where fences and roads had once been visible. The world seemed muted. Even the crows that perched on the church steeple were silent, their black silhouettes stark against the white sky. Elena stood at the kitchen window, watching the breath of the world rise in small plumes from chimneys across the hillside. Her own breath fogged the glass. She wiped it with her sleeve, then squinted at the distant outline of the forest. Snow clung to every branch, bending them into strange shapes. "Eat something," her mother said behind her. Elena turned. On the table sat a small loaf of bread, thin, narrow, barely larger than her hand. Ration week had begun again. Flour deliveries had been reduced, and the miller had been forced to have his production. The bread was dense, made with more barley and potato than wheat. Her mother cut it into careful slices, each one barely the width of a finger. She placed 2 slices on each plate, then added a spoonful of cold margarine to the center of the table. Her father joined them with a sigh, sliding into his chair. Joseph followed moments later, rubbing his hands to warm them. "Snow is knee-deep on the main road," Joseph said. "The mayor's men are trying to clear it, but without horses." He shook his head. "They'll need days." "No wagons today?" Lucas asked. "Or tomorrow," Joseph replied. "And maybe not this week." Elena swallowed. That meant no trade. No supplies. No news. No mail. She forced herself to eat the thin slice of bread, though it tasted dry, almost bitter. The winter in Weisbrunn had only just begun, and already it felt heavy. Her father broke off a small piece and handed it to her. "Eat slowly," he said gently. "Make it last." She nodded, chewing each bite deliberately. When breakfast was finished, her mother began clearing the table. "We should check on the Newman family," Marta said. "They live near the forest. Storms hit them worst." "I'll go with you," Elena said immediately. Her mother hesitated. "It is a long walk through deep snow." "I don't mind," Elena replied. "I should get out of the house. I want to see if everyone is all right." Her father exchanged a quick look with her mother, one that said they both understood what Elena would not voice. She needed to move. To do something. Anything to prevent her thoughts from circling back to the letter on the shelf. "All right," her mother said. "We will go after we finish washing up." The forest path. The path to the Newman cottage wound through a thick stretch of trees on the eastern slope. On any other winter day, the forest looked beautiful, branches heavy with snow, the ground soft and clean, the air crisp. Today, it felt different. Quiet. Too quiet. Elena and her mother walked side by side, carrying a basket between them. Inside were small offerings, a bottle of milk, a jar of pickles, and 2 slices of yesterday's bread. It wasn't much, but the Newman family had 5 children, and their father was away at the front. Snow reached up to Elena's thighs in some places. Each step required effort. The cold air stung her cheeks and ears, and she pulled her scarf tighter around her face. "What if the children are sick?" Elena asked. "Then we will help," her mother replied. "As neighbors should." A branch cracked somewhere deeper in the woods. Elena flinched. The sound reminded her of gunfire, and for a moment her heartbeat quickened. Her mother noticed. "It's just snow on branches," Marta said gently. "Storms make the trees heavy." Elena nodded but kept her gaze fixed forward. Each sound, each snap, each thud of falling snow, tugged at her nerves. War had changed the meaning of every sound. Even here, far from the front lines, fear had woven itself into daily life. When they reached a small clearing, they saw smoke drifting from the Newman's chimney. "That's a good sign," Marta murmured. They climbed the last small hill and approached the cottage. Its roof sagged under a thick layer of snow, nearly bending over the front door. Icicles hung from the eaves in long, silver spears. Before they could knock, the door swung open. Greta Newman stood there, cheeks flushed, hair in disarray. "Oh, thank goodness," she said. "I thought the whole town was buried." "We're all right," Marta replied. "We wanted to check on you." Greta stepped aside, ushering them in. "Please, come in." The children are by the stove. They're cold, but they're fine. Inside, the cottage was dim but warm. The fire in the stove glowed brightly, its heat filling the room. 3 of the younger children sat on a rug, wrapped in blankets, while the oldest girl stirred a pot of thin stew. "We brought a few things," Marta said, holding out the basket. Greta's eyes softened. "You shouldn't have. You need your own." Elena shook her head. "We have enough for now." Truthfully, they barely did, but the Newmans had even less. The youngest child, a boy no older than 5, tugged at Elena's coat. "Is it true?" he asked. Elena knelt. "Is what true? That the soldiers can't get home because the snow is too big?" Elena hesitated. Behind the boy, his siblings all stared at her wide-eyed. "Yes," she said finally. "The snow makes traveling difficult. But it will melt eventually." "Will Papa come home?" he whispered. Again, that familiar tightening inside her chest. "I hope so," she said softly. "We all hope so." The boy nodded, accepting the answer more easily than an adult would have. For nearly an hour, they stayed at the cottage, helping divide the food, checking the beams for storm damage, offering warm words where warm coats were lacking. Elena's mother gave Greta advice on keeping the children warm at night: stones heated by the stove, wrapped in cloth, herbs boiled into steam to ease coughing, blankets pinned together to stop drafts. When they finally left, the sun had begun to break through the clouds, casting soft light on the snow-covered forest. Elena felt tired, but lighter somehow. Helping others made the fears in her own heart seem less heavy. As they trudged back toward town, she looked up at the sky. "I wish Matthias could see this," she murmured. Her mother touched her arm. "One day," she said quietly. "When the war ends." "When will it end?" Elena asked. Her mother did not answer. No one could. A postman without letters. When Elena and her mother reached the town square, they found several villagers gathered around the fountain, their expressions tense. "What is it?" Marta asked. One of the men pointed. "The mail wagon. It made it through the southern pass." Elena's heart lurched. Mail. Letters. News. She hurried forward, slipping on a patch of ice. The postman, an older man with a worn blue coat, stood beside his small wagon, brushing frost from the wooden crate that held the letters. His horse looked exhausted, sides heaving, steam rising from its nostrils. "We weren't sure you'd make it," someone called. "Neither was I," the postman grumbled. "The pass nearly swallowed us. Snow up to my waist." "But you made it," a woman said, clutching her shawl. "That means, letters?" The postman's expression darkened. He lifted the crate. It was nearly empty. A ripple of quiet disappointment spread through the crowd. People exchanged glances, hope collapsing into resignation. "There was a landslide near the border," the postman said. Most of the mail carts turned back. Only this crate made it through. Elena swallowed hard. The postman began calling names. One by one, he handed out small envelopes, thin packages, scraps of paper wrapped in twine. Each name called brought relief to someone, but also fear to everyone else. Elizabeth Vogel. Johann Reiter. Henrik Bauer. Names echoed across the square like ticking seconds. When the crate was half empty, Elena clenched her hands together, her breath held painfully in her chest. "Matthias Weiss," the postman said. Elena's heart leaped. But another man, her Weiss from the southern farms, stepped forward. Elena's breath broke in her throat. Not him. Not her brother. Her chest tightened painfully. The postman continued. "Greta Newman." Greta rushed forward, trembling. The last few letters were handed out. Then silence. The postman closed the crate. "That's all," he said. A hush fell over the square. No one moved for several seconds. Elena felt the world tilt slightly, disappointment crashing down like another storm. No letter. Not this time. Her mother touched her shoulder. We must be patient. Elena nodded, but her eyes stung. Every letter that wasn't his felt like a louder silence. The ridge at night. While Weisbrunn searched for news, the soldiers at Hollenwald Ridge fought simply to endure. Night had fallen again, thick and absolute. The storm was gone, but the cold remained, sharper than before. Icicles clung to the trench walls. Breath froze in the air. Matthias sat beside Leon, who dozed against the trench wall, cradling his injured arm. The medics had wrapped it tightly, but supplies were low, and warmth even lower. A lantern flickered nearby, its light dim and orange. Matthias removed his gloves, nearly crying out from the pain of the cold striking his exposed fingers. He reached under his coat and pulled out something small and wrapped in cloth. A piece of bread. He had saved it from yesterday's rations. Barely a mouthful. He unwrapped it and broke it in half. Leon stirred. Weiss, what are you doing? Sharing, Matthias said simply. Leon stared at the piece of bread, then shook his head. No. Keep it. You need it. So do you, Matthias replied. Leon opened his mouth to protest but fell silent when Matthias pressed the bread into his good hand. The trench was quiet except for the distant rumble of artillery miles away. Leon ate slowly, eyes closing as he savored the tiny bite. You're a fool, he whispered. But thank you. Matthias smiled faintly and ate his own piece. It was hard as stone, but it tasted of home. Tasted of survival. Tasted of the chance of tomorrow. As he chewed, he imagined the kitchen in Weisbrunn, the smell of fresh bread, the warmth of the stove, Elena laughing as she scolded him for sneaking the crusts. He held on to that memory as tightly as he held on to the last crumbs. Memories were warmth here. Memories kept a man alive. The price of flour. Back in Weisbrunn, the miller posted a notice on his shop door. Flour rations cut again. 1 sack per family per month. A crowd gathered, murmuring anxiously. This winter will starve us, someone whispered. It's the war, another replied. All shipments go to the soldiers. We're left with scraps. Elena watched the miller's face, pale, thin, worried. He was not cruel. He simply had nothing left to offer. Her mother pressed a comforting hand to her arm. We will manage, Marta said, though her voice was tight. Elena exhaled slowly. We'll make potato bread. And cabbage bread. We will, her mother agreed. And we will share with those who need it most. Her mother smiled sadly. You have a soft heart, Elena. Matthias does too, she said quietly. Her mother's smile wavered. Yes. He always did. The town began to ration food more strictly. Meals grew smaller. Fires were lit only in one room to save wood. Nights became long stretches of cold, broken only by the sound of wind pressing against the walls. But people adapted. Neighbors shared what they could. The pastor opened the church to warm the elderly. Children collected branches from the forest for families running low on fuel. Elena found herself working constantly, cooking, shoveling, helping neighbors. Anything to keep her mind from drifting to a trench far away. Anything to keep the candle of hope alive. A sudden knock. Late one evening, as Elena sat by the window mending a torn scarf, a loud knock echoed through the house. Her heart jumped. Visitors were rare at night during winter. Her father rose slowly, lantern in hand, and opened the door. A figure stood on the threshold, covered in snow from shoulders to boots. A hood concealed their face. Evening, the stranger said, voice rough from cold. Is this the Weiss household? Yes, Lucas replied cautiously. The stranger lowered their hood. It was the postman. Elena stood up sharply. I'm sorry to disturb you so late, he said, reaching into his coat. But I found this wedged between the bottom boards of the crate. Must have slipped through during the storm. He held out a single envelope. Her breath caught. Her legs almost buckled. Her father gently took the envelope, then handed it to her without a word. Her fingers closed around it. Her name was written on the front, in familiar handwriting. Her vision blurred with sudden tears. The postman tipped his hat and stepped back into the snow. "Good night to you. Stay warm." The door closed. Silence filled the room. Elena stared at the letter, unable to breathe. "Read it," her mother whispered. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, thinner than usual, creased, smudged. She read the first line. Her knees gave way. Her father caught her before she fell. "What does it say?" Marta asked in a trembling voice. Elena swallowed, tears falling onto the letter. "It says," she whispered, breathless, voice breaking, "that he survived the attack." Her mother sobbed in relief. "He's alive," Elena whispered. "Matthias is alive." The candle on the table flickered. And for the first time in weeks, its flame felt warm. The letter saying Matthias had survived the attack became the most precious object in the Weiss household. For the first night in many weeks, Elena slept with something resembling peace. Not joy, not comfort, just a small clearing in the fog of fear. She placed the letter beneath her pillow, as if proximity alone could keep her brother warm across the frozen miles. Outside, the world remained locked in white. Snow covered everything, the hills, the rooftops, the fences, even the wells. Sometimes the wind swept fresh drifts across the fields, burying paths her father had carved just hours earlier. In the morning light, the world glowed faintly blue, as if the sun were too tired to shine any other color. Life settled into a quiet rhythm in Weisbrunn. A rhythm built from necessity. A rhythm built from survival. The frosted silence. In the early darkness of the next morning, Elena lit a candle and stepped outside to collect snow for melting. Their water barrel had frozen solid overnight, a thick layer of ice sealing the top. Snow was easier to melt, even if it tasted faintly like pine and smoke. The cold bit at her cheeks, sharp as needles. Her boots crunched through the old snow, which had hardened into an icy shell after multiple nights of sub-zero temperatures. She filled her bucket silently, listening to nothing but the soft rasp of snow against metal. No birds. No wind. No distant carriage wheels. Just silence, the kind that made the whole world feel suspended. Her breath curled upward in thin clouds, fading quickly into the morning air. She stood for a moment, scanning the horizon. The forest was still, the trees heavy and bowed, like old men leaning on canes. She imagined Matthias somewhere beneath a sky like this, cold, colorless, vast. She clutched the bucket tighter and returned inside. Her mother was already tending a small fire, coaxing the flames to life with patient, practiced movements. "We'll melt it for tea," Marta said without turning. "Tea helps the body stay warm." Elena set the bucket down. "Do we have any left?" "A little," her mother replied. "Just enough for today." Her father sat near the stove, rubbing his hands together. Joseph mended a torn glove with stiff fingers. The silence inside the house felt just as heavy as the silence outside. Finally, her father spoke. "We should check the livestock." "We lost 3 hens last night," Joseph replied quietly. "Froze right in their coop." Elena winced. They had only 9 left. Each egg was precious, more than money, more than trade. "We'll reinforce the coop today," Lucas said. "Extra straw. Extra boards." "And the well?" Marta asked. "Blocked," Lucas replied. "We'll have to keep melting snow." Elena sat near the stove, warming her hands, watching the steam rise from the melting snow in a pot. It reminded her of the hot soups her mother used to cook in autumn, thick, fragrant, filled with herbs and vegetables. Now, soups were thin, almost transparent, stretching the ingredients as far as possible. Elena did not complain. Nobody did, not in winters like this. The Coldest butte. By midday, the town square filled with people. Snow had been shoveled into high piles at the edges, allowing a narrow path to form through the center. Voices rose above the cold, some anxious, some angry. Elena, helping her father carry a small crate of potatoes, felt tension immediately. The coal merchant stood at the center of the crowd, cheeks red, beard frosted, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "I told you," he shouted. "The shipment never came. The road is blocked by landslides. I only have what's in my cellar." "That's exactly why we're here," someone yelled back. "People need coal. You'll freeze the whole town to death. Sell us what you have." The merchant shook his head. "If I sell everything today, I'll have nothing left in 2 weeks. And then my own children won't survive." His voice cracked slightly at the end. The crowd quieted, resentment softened by understanding. "We can ration it," another man said. "A few pieces per family." "That's not fair," an older woman argued. "Larger families need more." "Tough times make tough choices," the mayor said, stepping forward. Elena had always found Mayor Richter a calm, steady presence. His coat was thick, his gloves well-made, but worry etched deep lines into his face. "The coal merchant is right," the mayor said. "He cannot burn through his supply all at once. But he also cannot deny the town heat." Murmurs rippled through the people. "So we will ration," he continued. "Every household receives 3 pieces of coal. No more, no less." It was not enough. Not for 7 days of deep winter. Not for nights when the temperature slipped below freezing even inside. But it was something. The crowd dispersed, slowly, the hush of snow absorbing their footsteps. Elena and her father waited in line behind others. When their turn came, the merchant sighed and handed them 3 small, rough pieces, each barely as large as a fist. Elena held one in her hands. Cold. Hard. Heavy. It felt like holding a month of fear in a single object. As they walked home, her father carried 2 pieces while she carried the last one. He saw her staring at it. "I know," he said quietly. "It won't last long." "No," he admitted. "But we'll stretch it." "How?" He smiled weakly. "By hoping the winter stretches slower than our supplies." Elena almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. News from the east. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened again. Snow began to fall, slowly this time, drifting like feathers caught in a gentle breeze. Elena sat by the window, repairing her gloves with thin thread. Every stitch was a reminder that winter was a battle fought not only with soldiers, but with needles, wood, and bread. A knock sounded at the door. Her father opened it. It was Anton Mayer from the neighboring farm, a tall man with deep-set eyes and a long coat dusted with snow. "Lucas," he said gravely. "You should hear this." "What is it?" Lucas asked. "Soldiers passed through the eastern pass," Anton said. "They stopped at my barn for water." Elena froze. Her father's voice was quiet. "What did they say?" Anton removed his gloves slowly, warming his hands near the stove before speaking. "There was heavy fighting last week. Very heavy. The kind that changes the shape of maps." Elena's breath trembled. Her mother asked the question Elena could not. "Did they say which side held the line?" Anton hesitated. "The line held," he said. "But barely." Relief. Followed by fear. "What about the casualties?" Joseph asked. Anton shook his head. "They wouldn't say. Only that many men suffered frostbite. Some didn't survive the cold." Elena's stomach twisted. Frostbite. Cold. Storms. Her mind returned instantly to Matthias's last letter, the hurried writing, the stains on the paper, the uneven lines. Her mother sat heavily at the table. "All we can do is pray they survive the winter." Anton nodded. "My eldest is at the same ridge. We are all waiting for spring." Elena's throat tightened. Spring. A season that suddenly felt impossibly far away. Bread reduced. 2 days later, the mayor posted a second notice. Bread rations reduced to 1 loaf per household per week. Shock rippled across the town. People gathered in small clusters, whispering anxiously. Mothers clutched their baskets, fathers clenched their fists, children stared with wide, tired eyes. "We will starve before spring," someone murmured. Elena felt the weight of the words settle deep inside her. Not fear for herself. Fear for the town. Fear for her family. Fear for Matthias. Food shortages were not just inconvenient, they were dangerous. The weaker one grew, the more likely illness became. And illness in winter was too often a death sentence. Her mother tightened her scarf. "We must prepare for the long stretch." They collected their single weekly loaf, thin, dense, barely enough for 3 days. Elena carried it home with both hands, protective as if holding a newborn. Inside the house, her father set the bread on the table. "We will slice it thin," he said. "And supplement with potatoes." "What potatoes?" Joseph asked quietly. "We have 4 left." "Then we will boil cabbage," Marta whispered. "And snow," Joseph replied bitterly. Her mother gave him a look. Complaining does not fill stomachs. "No," Joseph sighed. "But silence doesn't either." A heavy quiet fell over the room. Elena placed her hand gently over the loaf. "We'll manage," she said, trying to believe it. Her mother nodded. "We always do." But even she didn't fully believe her own words. Across the white plains, far from Weisbrunn, on the frozen ridge where Matthias fought, food shortages were even worse. At dawn, soldiers lined up for their rations, watery stew that barely warmed their hands, and half a slice of stale bread. Men joked weakly, laughing through chattering teeth, pretending the cold wasn't killing them slowly. Matthias cupped his bowl, letting the heat soak into his numbed fingers. Leon leaned beside him, breathing clouds into the air. "Weiss," Leon said quietly. "Do you know what my family does in winter?" Matthias shook his head. "They make honey cakes," Leon said, eyes distant. "My mother used to say that winter didn't seem so harsh when the house smelled sweet." Matthias smiled faintly. "My mother makes apple bread." Leon looked at him. "You think they're eating any of it now?" Matthias swallowed. The memory of his last winter at home, warm kitchen, steam rising from a pot, laughter, felt like a story from another lifetime. "No," he said honestly. "But I hope they're eating something." Leon nodded. A whistle cut through the brittle air. The men stiffened. Captain Adler strode toward them, expression grim. "We move at dusk," he announced. Enemy scouts breached the northern trench. "We're reinforcing the line." Groans rippled through the men. "Move." In this cold. In this war. But orders were orders. Matthias gripped his rifle. Leon patted his shoulder weakly. "Well, Weiss. Looks like we'll freeze our bones off somewhere new tonight." Matthias tried to smile. But fear crept into his heart like a second winter. Scarcity and sickness. In Weisbrunn, winter brought more than hunger. It brought sickness. The first case appeared in the Fisher household. A boy aged 7, burning with fever. By morning, his sister fell ill too. Then 2 neighbors. The doctor, an elderly man with thinning hair and trembling hands, moved from house to house, carrying a bag that seemed lighter each day. Medicine was scarce. Herbs were frozen in the fields. Willow bark tea was all he had left for fevers. "Keep them warm," he told each family. "Warmth is everything." But warmth was the rarest commodity of all. Elena accompanied her mother to the Fisher's cottage, bringing what little they could spare: hot water, rags, a pinch of dried thyme. Inside, the room was thick with the smell of sickness and sweat. The boy lay beneath blankets, cheeks flushed, breath fast and shallow. His mother wept silently, wiping his forehead with trembling hands. "Will he be all right?" Elena whispered. Her mother placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. He must rest. Keep the blankets tight. The woman nodded, though fear shone clearly in her eyes. As they left the cottage, snow began falling again, covering the footprints they'd made only moments earlier. How many will fall sick? Elena asked. Many, her mother replied. Winter is cruel. And if food runs out? Her mother said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only answer. A soldier's memory. Night fell hard across the ridge. Matthias trudged through knee-deep snow, breath freezing on his scarf. The northern trench was poorly dug, half-collapsed from the storm. Reinforcing it meant long hours, frozen fingers, and constant fear that the enemy lurked in the white void. Leon struggled beside him, nearly slipping on the icy path. Why aren't we sleeping? He complained weakly. Because the army doesn't hibernate, Matthias muttered. Maybe it should, Leon grumbled. At least until spring. Matthias almost laughed. They reached the trench, dropped their packs, and began digging, slow, painful movements, shovels striking frozen earth that refused to yield. With each shovelful, Matthias thought of Weisbrunn, of home, of warmth, of bread. He remembered the festival held the winter before the war. Lanterns hung from trees. Children threw snowballs. Elena had baked sweet rolls and burned the first batch, filling the house with smoke. He had teased her all night. The memory warm. The world cold. The contrast ached inside him. Hours passed. Snow fell. The trench deepened. A shout pierced the night. Lights on the ridge. Movement. Matthias froze. Then instinct took over. Rifles lifted. Shovels dropped. Men pressed to the trench wall. The white darkness ahead shifted with shadows. The war had come again. A candle in the window. Back in Weisbrunn, Elena lit a candle as she did every night, placing it in the front window. The flame flickered against the glass, sending a pale golden glow into the snowy darkness. Why do you light it? Her mother asked softly. So Matthias can find his way home, Elena replied. Her mother touched her shoulder. He cannot see it from the front. I know, Elena whispered. But maybe he can feel it. And so, the little flame burned. Against the darkness. Against the cold. Against the war. A small light for a boy on a frozen ridge. A small hope for a world losing warmth. Elena sat beside the window until her eyes grew heavy. She pressed her palm to the glass. The cold seeped through instantly. You'll come home, she whispered. You must. Outside, snow continued to fall silently, burying footprints, softening rooftops, coating the world in white. Inside the house, the candle burned long into the night. And somewhere far away, under a sky filled with the same snow, Matthias fought to survive a night that felt colder than any before. The cold did not loosen its grip, but people slowly learned how to move within it. By midwinter, Weisbrunn had become a town of small, careful routines. Every step, every piece of wood, every crumb of bread was measured and counted. Time itself felt rationed, each day divided into tasks of survival. Elena woke before dawn most mornings, not because she wanted to, but because the house needed tending before the light arrived. The fire had to be coaxed back to life from faint embers. Snow had to be brought in and melted for water. The chickens, those that had survived, needed checking and feeding. And then there were the sick. More and more of the sick. The church's shelter. By late January, the church had changed. Once a place of quiet prayers and hymns, it was now partly a shelter, partly an infirmary, and partly the town's heart. The pews at the back had been pushed aside to make room for cots and straw-filled mattresses. Blankets, quilts, and old coats hung over the railings, drying slowly in the weak warmth from braziers. Elena entered with a basket of herbs and rags clutched in her arms. The cold followed her in, but the air inside was slightly warmer, filled with the smell of damp wool, burning coal, and the faint tang of medicinal teas. "Good morning, child," the pastor said, lifting a hand in greeting as he crossed the aisle. His beard had grown thicker over the winter, streaks of white blending with gray. Deep lines carved his forehead and the corners of his eyes, not from age alone, but from watching too many people suffer without being able to do enough. "Good morning, Pastor," Elena replied. Her breath puffed faintly in front of her. Even in here, one could still see the cold. "How are your parents?" he asked. "Holding on," she answered. "We all are." He nodded. "That is all anyone can do." He moved on to speak with another villager, leaving her to her work. In the back of the hall, 3 cots were occupied. Frau Fischer sat beside her son, whose fever had finally begun to break. His cheeks were still flushed, but the frantic rise and fall of his chest had calmed. On the next cot lay an elderly man with a thick wool cap pulled down over his ears, his eyes half closed as he listened to the pastor's low voice. On the last was a young woman Elena didn't recognize, a refugee from a town farther east, they said, where shells had fallen among the rooftops. Elena knelt beside her. "Good morning," she said softly. The woman's eyes opened slowly. They were pale, almost gray, with a tired depth that made her look older than she probably was. "Morning," the woman whispered. "How is the leg?" Elena asked. The woman grimaced. "It hurts less when I don't think about it." Elena offered a small smile. "Then we'll help you think about other things." She set down her basket and unwrapped a bundle of cloth. Inside was a jar of salve, a mixture of animal fat, herbs, and whatever else the doctor had managed to find. It wasn't much, but it kept skin from cracking and eased a little of the pain. Gently, Elena peeled back the blanket covering the woman's leg. Her calf was wrapped tightly with linen strips. When Elena loosened them, she revealed skin that was pale and mottled, with patches that had turned a frightening shade of white blue. "Frostbite." "Is it bad?" the woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena kept her expression calm. "The doctor says it can be saved, if we keep it warm and protected." The woman let out a shaky breath of relief. Only later, when Elena stepped away to wring out a cloth in warm water, did she allow her face to tighten. She had seen worse. Some had already lost toes. Some might lose more before winter was done. "We carry what we can," the doctor had said to her once, when she asked how he bore seeing so much suffering. "We carry small comforts when we cannot carry the pain itself." So that was what she did. She carried the salve, the herbs, the warm water, the extra blanket she had hidden under her own bed in case someone else needed it more. She carried the news. She carried the silence where words might wound. She carried hope in small, careful doses. Rumors and reality. Outside the church, the town churned quietly with rumors. Someone had heard that the Eastern Front had shifted south. Someone else said an Allied army had broken through. Others muttered about retreat, sacrifice, new lines drawn in snow and blood. Elena listened, but rarely spoke. Rumors were easy to carry but heavy to set down. Truth, when it came, often arrived on thin paper in dirty envelopes. One afternoon, as she left the church and stepped into the square, she saw a group of men huddled near the fountain, their faces tense. "It's true, I swear," one of them said. "My cousin wrote from the city. Trains full of wounded. They say the hospitals are overflowing." "From which front?" another asked. "The ridge to the east. Hollenwald, they call it." Hollenwald. The name hit Elena like a wave. She had seen it once before, stamped faintly at the top of Matthias's letter. Her stomach clenched. She did not walk closer. She did not ask questions. She knew that whatever they said, they would not know about one soldier named Matthias among thousands. Instead, she walked home, the snow crunching beneath her feet, her mind full of images she did not want to see, long lines of stretchers, faces pale from loss of blood and warmth, trains carrying men who had left as boys and returned as something else. When she reached the house, she paused outside the door, breathing slowly until her pulse calmed. Only then did she go inside. Her parents looked up from the stove and the table. "Any news?" her father asked. "None, that's certain," she replied, which was the only honest answer she could give. A frozen letter. Letters had become rarer than coal. Some weeks, the postman arrived with nothing at all. On other days, he brought only official notices, summons, rations, requisitions. When personal envelopes did appear, the town's breath seemed to pause until they were all delivered. One evening, just as the light outside turned the snow a bruised shade of blue, a knock came at the Weiss door. Elena opened it. The postman stood there, his coat covered in frost. His cheeks were raw from wind, and his eyes were tired, but he held a thin, familiar shape in his hand. "For you," he said simply. Her heart stumbled. She took the envelope with both hands, as if afraid it might shatter. "Thank you." He nodded and stepped back into the dark, his boots crunching toward the next house. Her parents and uncle were already standing. "Is it from him?" her mother whispered. Elena turned the envelope. Her name was written on it in the same hurried, slanted hand she knew so well. "Yes," she breathed. "Read," Lucas said gently. "We are listening." They gathered around the table. The candle flickered, throwing soft shadows over their faces. Outside, the wind groaned softly against the walls, as if trying to listen too. Elena opened the letter carefully, trying not to tear the fragile paper. The ink was faded in places, as if it had been written in poor light or damp air. "Dear Elena," it began. Her throat tightened. She read aloud. He spoke of the storm, the same one that had buried Weisbrunn, the same one that had turned the ridge into a white nightmare. "You would not believe the snow here," he wrote. "It is not like the snow on our hills. It is heavier, angrier, as if it wants to crush everything it touches. We fought in it. We bled in it. Some did not stand up again." He did not mention names. He did not need to. He spoke of Leon, though not in full detail. "My friend from the next village over lost 2 fingers to the cold," he wrote. He jokes that it will make him a terrible pianist, but he never played the piano anyway. Elena could almost hear his voice in those words, trying to soften the edges of horror with humor. But then the tone of the letter changed. "The worst part is not the shells or the cold," he wrote. "The worst part is the quiet after. When you count your friends and realize there are fewer than yesterday. When you stand in a trench and hear nothing but your own breath and the distant creak of trees. It feels like standing on the edge of the world." Her mother wiped at her eyes. Her father's jaw clenched. "There are nights," Matthias continued, "when I close my eyes and try to remember the sound of our town. The church bell. The rooster in the morning. Your footstep on the stair when you used to sneak down for extra bread. I hold those sounds like other men hold amulets." Elena swallowed. He ended the letter with the same strange mix of resignation and hope that had filled the previous one. "If I do not write often, it is not because I have forgotten you," he wrote. "It is because the days run together, and sometimes there is nowhere to send letters from. But know this, if I fall, I will fall with the memory of home in my hands. And if I live, I will come back and sit by our stove again, even if it is only burning one piece of wood." The last line was short. "Do not let the winter inside you," he wrote. "Outside, we cannot stop it. Inside, we still can." Elena's voice broke. She folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. Her mother reached across the table, laying her hand over Elena's. "We will not let it in," she whispered. "We promise." Leon's night. On the ridge, the sky was clear for the first time in days. Stars glittered above like shards of ice. The moon hung low and pale, turning the snow-covered landscape into a world of shadows and faint silver. Matthias sat with Leon near the edge of the trench, wrapped in layers of wool and whatever scraps of cloth they could find. Leon's right hand was bandaged thickly, fingers gone beneath the wrappings. "Hurts?" Matthias asked quietly. "Like someone is chewing on the bones," Leon muttered. Matthias looked up at the sky. "The stars look sharper here." That's because it's colder, Leon said. Everything cuts deeper. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the creak of the world. Far beyond, artillery rumbled like distant thunder, but the front was quieter tonight. No charges. No flares. Just cold. You ever think we'll leave this place? Leon asked softly. Alive? Matthias said. Alive, dead, as ghosts. I just mean leave. Yes, Matthias replied after a moment. I have to believe that. For your family? Leon asked. For mine, Matthias said. And for yours. Leon chuckled weakly. My mother will kill me when she sees my hand. She always said I never took proper care of my gloves. Then you must go home and let her scold you, Matthias replied. Leon's smile faded, but his eyes softened. You know what I miss the most? He asked. What? The weight of small things, Leon said. A cup. A book. A pillow. It's strange, we carry rifles, packs, shovels, crates. But I can't remember the last time I held something small that didn't feel like it was made for war. Matthias was quiet. He reached into his coat and pulled out a tiny object. A button. Old, silver-colored, slightly dented. This, he said, is from my father's coat. It came loose the winter before the war. He tossed it on the table and said it was no use anymore. I took it. Leon raised his eyebrows. You carried a button into a war? Yes. Why? Matthias shrugged. Because it doesn't belong here. Leon laughed softly. Maybe that's exactly why it does. Matthias turned the button over between his fingers. The weight was almost nothing. But it anchored him. To a house on a hill. To a family sitting in a circle of candlelight. To a world before trenches and frostbitten hands. The things they carried were small, but they kept them from becoming only soldiers. They kept them human. A winter funeral. Weisbrunn did not escape death. No town does in winters like that. One cold morning, the church bell rang once, slowly, then again. Its sound rolled across the snow, thin and hollow. People paused in their routines. Some crossed themselves. Others simply bowed their heads. Old Hermeyer had died during the night. His heart, the doctor said, had simply given up against the cold. He had been a fixture in town for as long as anyone could remember, always sitting on the bench near the square, pipe in hand, telling stories about winters past. He said this wasn't the worst winter he'd seen, Joseph murmured as they prepared to walk to the cemetery. But I think this one outlived him. Elena wrapped her scarf tighter and pulled on her gloves. The funeral would be short. They could not stand long in the open without risking frostbite. In the cemetery, the ground was too frozen for a proper grave. Men had spent hours hacking at the earth to make a shallow resting place. The coffin looked almost too small for a life so long. The pastor spoke quickly, his breath clouding before his face. We commit our brother to the earth, he said, voice trembling slightly, even when the earth is hard and unyielding. We remember his stories, his laughter, the warmth he carried even in the cold. As they lowered the coffin, a gust of wind swept through the bare trees, scattering snow from the branches. Elena closed her eyes. Another life gone. Another story ended. Another name to add to the quiet tally in people's hearts. When the short ceremony ended, people left in twos and threes, boots crunching on hard snow. No one spoke loudly. There was a shared understanding that words were fragile things in times like these. As Elena walked home, she glanced at the sky. Clouds were gathering again. She wondered how many more funerals the town would see before spring. The decision. That evening, as they sat around the stove, her father spoke in a low, measured voice. We were asked something today, he said. Elena looked up from the scarf she was mending. By whom? The mayor, Lucas replied. And the pastor. Her mother straightened. What did they ask? Her father hesitated. They are organizing a relief group, he said. To help distribute food, care for the sick, and clear roads when storms come. And, if needed, to help refugees should more arrive from the east. That sounds like good work, Marta said. It is, Lucas replied. But it is hard work. Cold work. He looked at Elena. They asked if you would help. Elena blinked. Me? You already work in the church, her father said. The pastor says you learn quickly. The doctor says you have gentle hands. Her cheeks warmed despite the cold. I am not a nurse, she protested. No, her father agreed. But few are. You have seen how desperate things have become. They need people who can bear difficult sights and not look away. Elena looked down at her hands. She thought of the woman with the frostbitten leg, of the fisher boy with his fever, of the tired faces in the church-turned shelter. She thought of Matthias, standing in a trench, carrying his rifle and a button from home. She thought of the line in his letter. Do not let the winter inside you. Slowly, she nodded. I will help, she said. Her mother's eyes glistened with mixed pride and fear. It will not be easy, Marta said. I know, Elena replied. You may see more death, Joseph added softly. I know, she repeated. Her father reached across the table and took her hand. His skin was rough and cold, but his grip was steady. We will support you, he said. But promise us one thing. What? She asked. That you will come home each night, he said. Even if the work is heavy, even if the day is long. Come home. Let us share the weight. Her throat tightened. I promise, she whispered. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the shutters. Inside, a decision had been made. She would not hold a rifle or march across frozen fields. Her war would be fought in crowded rooms and snowdrift streets, with bandages and bread and soft words spoken over hard truths. The front had many faces. Hers would be one of them. Threads of 2 winters. The winter moved forward, one day at a time. In Weisbrunn, Elena rose earlier, walked farther, and grew more tired. She helped organize ration lines, carried buckets of snow to elderly neighbors, boiled water until the kitchen filled with steam. She washed linens at the church and sat with the dying when they had no one else. Sometimes she felt like a lantern held in a shaking hand, light threatened constantly by the cold wind, but not yet extinguished. At the ridge, Matthias trudged through snow, stood long hours on watch, and wrote letters by the faint light of oil lamps. He shared what food he had, told stories whenever silence grew too heavy, and gripped a small metal button in his fist when fear threatened to swallow him. Sometimes he felt like a thread stretched too thin between 2 worlds, one of war, one of home, but still unbroken. They did not know, of course, how closely their days echoed each other. When Elena lifted a bucket of snow, Matthias lifted a crate of frozen ammunition. When she sat beside a sick child, he sat beside a wounded friend. When she lit a candle at the window, he looked up at the stars, searching for something he could not name. They were both carrying things too heavy for their years. But they carried them anyway. Because that was what this winter demanded. Because that was what war did, it turned ordinary people into quiet bearers of impossible loads. That night, as Elena finally lay down, exhaustion settling into her bones, she listened to the creak of the house and the distant sigh of wind. The candle in the window had burned low, but had not gone out. She closed her eyes and imagined Matthias doing the same somewhere under a different sky. Between them stretched snow, trenches, borders, rumors, hunger, and fear. But also letters. Memories. And a stubborn, fragile promise that this would not last forever. In the deep, cold silence of the night, as Europe groaned under ice and war, both sister and brother slept at last, not peacefully, but deeply, like people who had given everything that day just to keep going. The winter continued. The war continued. But so did they. And sometimes, that alone was enough. Winter did not end in a single moment. It did not retreat with the sunrise or melt under one warm breeze. Instead, it clung stubbornly to the land, deepening in some places even as it weakened in others. The people of Weisbrunn woke each day unsure whether the cold would sharpen or soften, whether the sky would bless them with fragile sunlight or bury them beneath another storm. But by late February, a point when even the strongest felt frayed at the edges, change began to whisper along the horizon. Small changes. Faint changes. But in a winter like this, even the smallest shift felt monumental. A flicker of warmth. The first hint came one morning when Elena stepped outside to gather snow for melting. The air was still cold, bitingly so, but something felt different. The wind no longer sliced like a blade, it brushed past her with a gentler, almost weary touch. When she dug her boots into the snow, the layer beneath was not as solid as before. A thin crust had formed on the surface, fragile enough to crumble. She looked up. The sky, usually an endless slab of gray, showed tinges of pale gold along the edges. Not sunrise, that had passed. But light nonetheless. Soft. Hesitant. She breathed it in. It did not warm her skin. But it warmed something deeper. Inside the house, her mother noticed the change too. "It's shifting," Marta murmured as she poured hot water into a basin. "Winter is loosening." Her father, warming his hands near the stove, nodded but said nothing. He had lived through enough winters to know that hope was something to handle carefully. It could melt too easily if held too close. Still, the house felt slightly different that day, not warmer, but less suffocating. As if the walls themselves felt the balance tipping. The last flour sack. Ration day arrived again, but this time, the line outside the mill looked shorter. People moved more slowly, with less urgency. The town had passed through the worst weeks, though they were still weeks of hunger. Still weeks of fear. Still weeks where even bread felt like a luxury. Elena stood in line with her mother, holding an empty sack. The miller emerged with his usual solemn face, wiping flour dust from his brow. "1 sack per family," he said loudly. "The same rule." But his tone held a tremor, a new one. Uncertainty. He opened the door, and people shuffled forward. But when Elena and Marta reached the front, the miller hesitated. He reached into the storeroom. Lifted a half-full sack. And stopped. "That's all?" Marta asked softly. The miller nodded, grief pinching his features. "The last delivery we had before the landslides." "Then what do we do?" someone behind Elena whispered. The miller's answer was simple. "Wait and pray that the roads open before the sacks run empty." A hush fell over the crowd. But Elena noticed something else, something subtle. He wasn't saying they wouldn't open. He was saying not yet. A different kind of fear flickered across the faces around her, but also a fragile sort of hope. Spring was still distant. But not impossible. The ridge thaws. Far from Weisbrunn, the signs of shifting winter reached the trenches. The morning frost had begun to melt earlier. The ground, once frozen solid, grew soft in places, mud replacing ice. The air, still brutal, no longer cut into the lungs with every breath. Men noticed. Matthias noticed. One afternoon, as he leaned over the trench wall to shovel slush aside, a single drop of water fell from an icicle and splashed onto his glove. A drop. Just one. But it startled him enough that he froze for a full second. "Spring spit on you, Weiss?" Leon asked, limping over with his wounded hand wrapped in fresh bandages. "No," Matthias said, staring at the icicle. Winter blinked. Leon snorted. "Wake me when it closes its eyes for good." Matthias smiled faintly. Still, the change meant other things. It meant mud, deep, sucking mud that made marching torture and turned every movement sluggish. It meant trenches flooding again. It meant boots clogged with ice-soaked earth. But it also meant one more thing. A shift in fighting. Winter had protected them in strange ways, harsh cold slowed both armies. Now movement was possible again. So what do you think? Leon asked quietly later that night, as they huddled around a meager fire. Will they attack more, or less? More, Matthias replied. When the ground moves, armies move. Leon sighed. And when armies move, men die. They both fell silent. Around them, soldiers muttered, coughed, sharpened knives, rewrapped frozen bandages. The sky above was clouded, but stars peeked through in thin cracks. Weiss, Leon said softly. When all this ends, what's the first thing you'll do? Matthias didn't hesitate. I'll walk home, he said. Even if it takes me a month. Even if my boots fall apart halfway. I'll walk through whatever's left of the roads, and when I reach Weisbrunn, I'll knock on the door, and when Elena opens it, I'll say. He trailed off, voice catching. Leon waited. I'll say I kept my promise. Leon nodded slowly. You will, he said. You're too stubborn not to. Matthias smiled through the ache in his chest. But deep inside, fear coiled like cold metal. Promising to come home and managing to survive were two different things. The sickness worsens. Spring hints brought no relief to the sick. In Weisbrunn, the fever spread faster. 2 new cots were added to the church, then 3 more. The pastor's voice grew hoarse from constant prayer. The doctor's hands trembled as he worked from dawn until long after dark. Elena spent nearly every morning in the church now, checking blankets, reheating water, wiping foreheads damp with fever sweat. Herbal compress, the doctor instructed one evening, handing her a pot of steaming liquid. Apply it to their chests. It helps them breathe. She nodded, carrying the pot carefully across the room. The young refugee woman, the one with frostbite, had taken a turn for the worse. Her breath rasped, shallow and painful. Elena knelt beside her. It's all right, she whispered. I'm here. The woman's eyelids fluttered open. I don't want to die in a place that's not my home. Elena's throat tightened. You're not dying, she whispered, though the truth was uncertain. You're resting. You're safe. Tears pooled in the woman's eyes, but she nodded. Elena placed the warm compress on her chest. The woman sighed softly, some tension easing. Later, when Elena stepped outside to fetch fresh water, she found the doctor crouched against the church wall, head in his hands. You're tired, she said quietly. He let out a strained laugh. Child, I'm more than tired. I'm defeated. No, Elena said gently. Not while you're still here. He looked up, eyes red. Some nights I lose more patience than I save. But you come anyway. For how long? He rubbed his temples. I wonder whether this winter will outlast me. Elena placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture she had learned from her mother. Winter will end, she said firmly. Even this one. He stared at her for a long moment. Then nodded, slowly. A sudden arrival. The next morning brought something no one expected. Noise. Not the usual quiet shuffle of villagers. Not the wind. Not the distant groan of snow shifting. But the crack of wood and the thump of heavy wheels. Elena was outside collecting snow when she heard it. She stood up straight, listening. The sound echoed down the road leading into town. And then, a cart appeared. A cart pulled by a pair of exhausted horses, their coats caked with frost and mud. Behind it followed another cart, then another. Supply convoy, someone shouted. People rushed from their homes, scarves flapping, boots sinking into melting drifts. Elena's heart soared. Supplies. Flour. Coal. Medicine? The convoy stopped in the square. Soldiers in worn coats jumped down, stretching stiff limbs. One of them tipped his cap. Roads cleared 2 days ago, he announced. We brought everything we could fit. The crowd murmured with relief, some even crying softly. The mayor stepped forward. Thank you, he said sincerely. But Elena noticed something the others did not instantly. Behind the soldiers, stepping from the second cart, was a medic wearing a stained armband and carrying a thick satchel. A medic from the front. Her breath caught. If medics had come with the convoy, it meant something else. It meant news. She approached cautiously, clutching her shawl. "Excuse me," she asked softly. Were you at Hollenwald Ridge?" The medic paused, studying her face. "Yes," he said. "I was stationed there until 3 weeks ago." Her pulse pounded. "Did you happen to meet a soldier named Matthias Weiss?" He thought for a moment. Then nodded slowly. "Yes. I know him." Her knees nearly gave way. She swallowed. "Is he alive?" The medic's face softened. "He was alive when I left," he said. "And he was strong. A good man. Helped more wounded than many of my assistants." Elena covered her mouth, trembling. But then he added, more quietly. "There was a second battle. A bad one. I didn't see him after that day, but I didn't see his name on the casualty list either." Her heart rose. But did not reach full hope. Alive. Maybe alive. Missing. Or simply unaccounted for. The medic placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Winter is breaking," he said. "And when spring comes, soldiers can move again. Mail can move again." She nodded, though her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once more, then turned to help unload the supplies. Elena stood in the snow, heart heavy, and lied all at once. Alive. Maybe. Somewhere. Still fighting. Still trying to come home. A message in the snow. That evening, Elena walked to the window, lighting her candle as she always did. The flame flickered faintly, casting soft golden arcs across the room. She pressed her palm to the cold glass and whispered. "Come home, Matthias. Please come home." Outside, the sky glowed with pale starlight. And the snow, melting slowly at the edges of the road, revealed something beneath it. Not a flower. Not grass. Not bare earth. But a thin, fragile line of water trickling along the stone gutter, meltwater from the day's warmer air. Her breath hitched. It was small. Barely visible. But it was spring. The beginning. The first opening in winter's armor. She leaned closer to the window, candlelight warm against her cheek. "Winter is breaking," she whispered, as if speaking to her brother across the frozen distance. "Can you feel it?" The candle burned bright and steady, refusing to flicker. Outside, the night carried her words far beyond Weissbrunn. Far across the snow. Far across the war. Perhaps even far enough for Matthias to feel them. Spring did not arrive with a celebration. It came quietly, almost shyly, peeking around the edges of winter like a child testing whether it was safe to step into a room filled with adults. A day of softer winds. A night where frost didn't form on the window. A morning where a thin trickle of water ran beneath the snow. Then, all at once, the world began to change. Not quickly. But undeniably. The first thaw. By early March, the people of Weissbrunn woke to the sound of dripping. At first it was so faint they thought it was only a dream, a phantom sound conjured by longing. But then more drips joined the first, forming a slow, rhythmic tapping along rooftops and eaves. Elena heard it before she opened her eyes. She lay still beneath her blanket, staring at the ceiling. Tap tapped, tapped. A soft, irregular beat. Water. Running water. She sat up sharply, heart pounding with something that felt suspiciously like joy. She threw on her shawl and hurried to the window. Her breath fogged the glass. She wiped it with her sleeve and stared out. A long bead of water slid down the pane. Then another. Below, the snow on the path glistened in the morning light. "Mother," she whispered. "It's melting." She heard footsteps behind her. Her father stood there, his hair still gray from worry, but his eyes brighter than she'd seen in months. "Yes," he said softly. "Winter is letting go." Her mother joined them, pressing her hands together. "It lasted too long," she murmured. "Much too long." A thin trickle of water rolled down the gutter, glistening like silver. A sound not heard in months. A sound that meant everything. The roads reopen. Within a week, workers had begun clearing the main road. Snow still knee-deep in places, but softer now. Breakable. Movable. They shoveled tirelessly, bodies exhausted but spirits lifted by each patch of earth they uncovered. The mayor directed the effort with renewed energy. Even the coal merchant, who had spent most of winter arguing with half the town, was now out shoveling, his beard dripping with meltwater. Elena helped carry water to the workers. She wiped sweat from her brow, sweat, in winter. And laughed softly as a man called out. "Careful. You'll flood the whole valley if this snow melts any faster." There was laughter where there had been only silence. Even the children came out to play, thrusting sticks into the softening mounds of snow and cheering when the sticks didn't snap in the cold. For the first time in months, the town felt alive again. But not untouched. Not unscarred. Every face carried the winter's weight. Every home bore the signs of struggle. And every heart still waited for news. Especially Elena's. Letters that never came. With the road slowly opening, the postman resumed his familiar routes, though each day's deliveries varied wildly. Some days, he rode into town carrying a large satchel full of letters, pages filled with apologies for silence, with updates, with hope, with fear, with reassurance. Other days, he carried only official notices. Other days, he carried nothing at all. Elena waited by the window each afternoon, her palms pressed against the warm glass. She watched the road, watched for the flash of blue coat and brown satchel. Some days he came. Some days he did not. On the days he arrived, her heart nearly broke from the anticipation. On the days he didn't, her heart nearly broke from the disappointment. Weeks passed. Still no new letter from Matthias. Her mother comforted her gently. "He may be in an area where letters cannot leave," she said. Her father added, "or he may be on the move with his unit." Joseph finally said the thing no one wanted to voice. "He may be fighting for his life." But even he said it softly, as though trying not to disturb the delicate balance of hope inside her. Elena lit the candle every night. Every single night. The flame never faltered. Not once. "It's all I can do," she whispered to the window. "Please, Matthias. Please come home. What war leaves behind?" Despite the thaw, the church remained full. Winter fever lingered in some homes. And refugees continued to arrive from towns ravaged by war, gaunt faces, hollow eyes, clothes torn by cold or fire. Elena worked harder than ever, helping the doctor change bandages, handing out hot water, wrapping shivering bodies in blankets. She learned to stay strong even when her heart cracked. One afternoon, a group of soldiers arrived in town to restock supplies from the convoy. Their uniforms were worn, boots caked in mud, faces drawn with fatigue. As Elena carried baskets of bread rolls, courtesy of the first real flour shipment, past them, one soldier pointed at her. "You there," he said gently. "Miss, can I trouble you for something?" She paused. "Yes?" He removed his helmet. His hair was matted. His eyes were exhausted. But his voice held familiarity, not his voice, but his accent. "You're from Weisbrunn, aren't you?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Then you might know one of ours," he said. "A soldier named Weiss. Matthias Weiss." Her breath froze. "Yes," she whispered. "He's my brother." The soldier's expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't have news, not exactly. But I saw him once." "When?" Her voice trembled. "A month ago. Maybe more. Before the second offensive at the ridge. He was alive. strong, helping carry wounded through the snow. She pressed a hand to her heart. Alive. Still alive then. But then he added, gently, I heard many from that unit were separated afterward. She felt her knees weaken. Separated, she whispered. What does that mean? It means some retreated, some advanced, some went missing in the storm. It was chaos. Elena felt dizzy. The soldier placed a hand on her arm. I believe he tries to come home, he said softly. I saw it in his eyes. He talked about this town like it was heaven after winter. Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, thank you. The soldier nodded, stepped back, and walked away with his unit. She stood in the middle of the square, trembling, torn between hope and fear. A storm had scattered the men like leaves. But leaves could find their way home. Couldn't they? The day the snow gave way. 3 weeks after the first thaw, the world changed again. The last patches of ice clung desperately to shaded corners of the forest. Mud replaced snow along the roads. The river, frozen for months, cracked one morning like the sky splitting open. By the afternoon, water flowed again. Not fast. Not deep. But clear. Alive. Elena stood by the bank, listening to the water's music. For a moment, she let herself close her eyes and simply breathe. Spring was real. It was here. Finally. She imagined Matthias somewhere beneath the same sky, perhaps hearing a river thaw where he was. Perhaps smelling the first wet earth. Perhaps thinking of home. Perhaps walking toward it. A warm breeze brushed her cheek, carrying the faint scent of meltwater. She saw her mother approaching from the road, waving. Elena, she called. Come quickly, the postman brought something. Elena's heart leapt painfully. She ran. Boots splashing through mud, hair whipping behind her, breath sharp in her chest. When she reached the house, the postman stood at the door. His satchel was almost empty. He held a single envelope. For her. Her hand shook as she took it. Her name written in familiar strokes. Slightly crooked. As always. She looked up at the postman. Where did this come from? She whispered. A field station near the ridge, he said. Delayed by weeks. But it was marked urgent. Her heart pounded. Hands trembling, she opened the envelope. Her family gathered around her, silent. She unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the first lines. Tears blurred the words. Her breath caught. Her knees weakened. Then she read aloud. The letter. My dearest sister Elena. If this letter reaches you, then the worst of winter has ended, and I pray you are standing somewhere where the snow has begun to melt. I am writing from a field shelter after the last assault. I cannot say where I am, but I am alive. Truly alive, and safe for the moment. I survived the storm. I survived the battle. Many did not, and I carry their faces with me, but I am still here. And I am coming home. I do not know when. The units are scattered. The roads are ruined. But I am walking west. Walking every day. Walking toward you. If the mountains block me, I will go around them. If the rivers flood, I will wait. If my boots fall apart, I will walk barefoot. I will come home, Elena. I will come home. Keep the candle burning. I look for its light in my dreams. Your brother, always. Matthias. The road home. Elena lowered the letter, tears streaming down her face. Her mother sobbed openly. Her father bowed his head. Joseph whispered, that boy, that stubborn boy. He's alive, Elena choked out. He's coming home. She looked out the window. The candle flickered. The world glowed with spring light. She whispered. You're walking home. I will wait. I won't look away from that road. And she didn't. Every day, she walked to the edge of the village. stood by the melting fields. Watched. Hours at a time. Days passing. Hope sharpening. Fear loosening. Winter dissolving. Until one late afternoon, as she stood beneath the budding branches of an apple tree, she saw a figure crest the hill. Slow. Limping. Carrying only a small pack. Thin. Exhausted. But smiling. Smiling the moment he saw her. Elena, the voice cracked through the air. Her breath flew from her chest. Her knees buckled. She ran. Ran harder than she'd ever run. Mud splashing. Tears blurring. Heart breaking open. Matthias. He dropped his pack. Opened his arms. And she collided with him, nearly knocking him over, sobbing into his shoulder as he held her with what strength he had left. You came home, she wept. I told you, he whispered into her hair. Winter could not keep me. War could not keep me. She pulled back to look at him. Dirty. Thin. Scarred. Alive. Human. He touched her cheek gently. You kept the candle burning. I'll never stop, she whispered. Behind them, the villagers emerged from their doorways, gathering, staring, covering their mouths, crying at the sight of a miracle walking into town. Matthias lifted his gaze to the sky. Soft sunlight washed the snowless fields. And he smiled. Home. Finally. After winter. After war. After everything. Elena took his hand. Come, she said softly. Mother and father are waiting. They walked down the path together. Slowly. Steadily. Without fear. Behind them, the last sliver of winter melted in the sun. Ahead of them lay spring. And the long, slow healing of everything winter had broken.